We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Subscribe and follow on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can find Booked on Rock on all your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeart, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker, and more. Links to all the social media sites and where you can listen to Booked on Rock at bookedonrock.com. Adele Bertei is our guest to talk about her new book, Twist, an American Girl. The iconic underground rock and roll musician tells her harrowing story of transforming trauma through art, and it's all told through the voice of Adele's young alter ego, Maddie Twist. One reviewer calls the book a dark, demented, horrific, and a hilarious shot to the heart of American girlhood. Adele survived a childhood many wouldn't and only came out stronger. Dysfunctional parents, poverty, stints in the foster system, her struggles with her sexuality, living on the streets, and troubles with the law. It's a gripping story that draws you in and keeps you there right until the end. Adele will talk about the book and the real-life stories that inspired it. I also ask Adele about her band The Bloods, the first rock and roll band of gay women who publicly came out, plus her work with Brian Eno, Thomas Dolby, Tears for Fears, and more. A playlist of Adele's music, plus her latest singles, American Elegy and Savage is the World, on the show notes page. But first, here is Adele Bertei. Adele, welcome to the podcast. It's great to meet you.
So great to see you and meet you. Thank you for having me.
What a fabulous book. I mean, it's just brilliantly written. So I just want, first off, congratulations. It's an amazing book.
Thank you. Thank you.
And what a story. You tell this story through an alter ego named Maddie Twist. Can you talk about why you decided to use another name and where does that name Maddie Twist come from?
Well, I've been working on this book for decades. Would write a little bit, stick it in a drawer, pull it back out a few years after. And, as you've read it, you can imagine it was a very hard story to write because it is a memoir. And I decided that finding a voice for the character and as writing as a child going through it was the most powerful way to tell the story. But it also provided me with a sense of armor, like a Trojan horse, to go into those dark spaces and feel a little safer. And it worked. I mean, and Maddie Twist, because of the fact that it is true that my Italian grandmother's name was Maria Maddalena, which is Mary Magdalene. And for generations, the women on the Italian side were named Mary Magdalene. And then Twist, because of Oliver Twist and Kitty Twist from Walk on the Wild Side. My mother's nickname was Kitty.
Was it therapeutic writing this book?
Well, no book should really be therapy. I really tried my best not to, to avoid that cliche of the misery memoir, and for me, it was really about telling a story of how I actually transmuted those darker experiences into a way to survive, and not just survive, but to, seize on imagination as a way to go forward in life too. I mean, my mother was a schizophrenic and she could be incredibly abusive, but at the same time, her imagination and creativity, it became my badge of honor in a way. I was able to turn her affliction into a way of courage, to use my imagination and not to just become a cog in a certain, wheel of what women were supposed to be, in terms of gendered positions and things like that. It gave me a lot of courage. She gave me courage.
Well, I think the book will give others courage too. Very inspirational. Have you gotten some feedback regarding this?
Yeah. I mean, people are, seem to be very inspired by it. And I'm fortunate to hear things like that, because that's kind of the point of writing it is there's got to be kids out there or young adults or even older adults that have gone through similar traumas. And maybe it can be a little bit of a source of solace or healing for them.
And the book focuses on the years between 1965 and 1972, Cleveland, Ohio. Can you talk about what your childhood was like at that time, specifically regarding your mother and father and the relationship you had with them?
Well, I lived in a very working class household for, say, the first 9, 10 years of my life. My father was an Italian immigrant, and my mother's ancestry was Irish. It was rough. We lived in a suburb, GI bungalows, where it was an Italian neighborhood, Irish, Polish, very conservative. Women were supposed to be housewives like Donna Reed, and we're going back. We're talking 50s types of housewives, and it was a very strenuously gendered role for women. And my mother couldn't really deal with it. She was too creative. She was a dancer in musical theater. And my father was a very toxic masculine man, like very abusive to her. He would beat her up. He did not want her to be her authentic self, her imaginative self. And he wasn't a very educated man. I mean, I think the most he could read was a racing form. He was a gambler, and he had a hard time growing up with not speaking English as an Italian immigrant. And so it was really, really rough. And he abandoned the family, and my mother couldn't take care of us because she was getting sicker by the day, and the state intervened and took us into custody. And I tell that story of how that happened in the book.
Yeah, what stands out to me, and you talked about this just briefly at the start, is how Maddie finds a way to survive this environment by reading, whether it's poetry or books. And there's a quote in the book you write, like music, books are boats to sail away on to strange and wondrous shores. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about how important it was to have that escape? Because it really felt like, from reading the book, like it was a life raft.
Right. Yeah. Well, music and books and, poetry and Edgar Allan Poe and Dickens. And, I read like crazy when I was a kid, and music was also a way of getting away from the trauma. You could just sink yourself into music. I mean, when you're a child, you don't really understand emotions. You have no emotional intelligence. You are trying to mimic what you see in the world, but more so in your immediate family. And if your immediate family is like wacko, you don't know what's going on because it's at such a contrast to what you see the other kids going through or their families. So, sometimes I think that magical thinking gets a bad rap. I think the books and the music were ways for me to imagine another life for myself, away from that trauma, a buffer against the trauma.
Your grandmother was a piano player, and your mom took you to movies. So yes. Music and movies, there was a lot of creativity around you, which, boy, did that really serve as a tool for you?
Music is something I recognized and discovered as I was growing up, is how fundamental music is to life, really. I mean, and I'm not talking just for myself. I'm sure that there are songs that you remember from your childhood that everyone remembers that have a great resonance or that act like very important markers in our lives, For me, music, well, my grandmother played honky tonk and stride piano during the Depression in speakeasies, because she raised my mother without a father, without a husband. It was a very dangerous time for women, but my mother would hang on to the piano leg when she was a little girl, and honky tonk and stride is very rhythmic music. So those rhythms actually she absorbed them in her DNA, and in turn she became a dancer. And then I in turn loved my grandmother and would sit next to her and as she played the piano. So it became part of a bone deep resonance in my mother's life and then in my life.
In the book, you do write about how your mom, Kitty, was happy for a little while, and things actually were good with your mom and dad for a time there. Mm-hmm. When did things go wrong?
Well, I can tell you something that women don't usually talk about, especially women of my mother's generation, women that were born in the 30s and 40s, is my mother had a hysterectomy. And when that happened, she went immediately into menopause. And doctors they still are in the clouds about how to treat women with menopause. It's a very, very hard time for women in their lives. And when you do have a hysterectomy, it slams you directly into menopause. There were no hormonal treatments. There was nothing. And she was already drinking and taking drugs that were prescribed by psychiatrists. So the combination of all of this affected her mentally and emotionally in a very severe way. It started going wrong when I was probably about 9 or 10, but my father was also very abusive, and his abuse accelerated and became very violent against her. So there was really no other way to go but for the state to take custody of us at that point.
Can you talk about the point in the book where the first time Maddie heard James Brown's song, It's a Man's World, she cried, and why that was?
I watched what my grandmother went through with her husband, my step-grandfather, who took her music away from her, which was brutal because it was her life. And then I watched how my father treated my mother. So I was watching what women went through and how they weren't allowed. Men didn't care what women thought or, what their creativity might have been. They really had these strictly gendered roles of supporting the men and being the mothers and, doing the housework. And I saw a lot of cruelty from men towards women in my immediate family. And it made me feel as a young girl in the 50s and early 60s that, it was a man's world, and that James Brown he was talking about all the great things men had done, in the world, and that it wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl, but he doesn't mention any of the bad things that men did, like war and murder and, all of the things that we look around and still see going on in the world. And it just made me very sad as a kid. I didn't want to be a woman at that point.
The character Jack, I believe he's the half-brother of Maddie's mother, Kitty?
Yes.
I have that right? Okay. He reminded you of James Dean, the haircut, the moves, the jeans.
Yes.
He had that. Seemed like he was a cool dude. There's an emotional moment when he tells Maddie, quote, "I'm going back to Nam tomorrow. Your own war is right here, kid. So we both need to be brave soldiers." Yes. Wow.
He was wonderful. And this is something I didn't talk about in the book because it happened way after the ending of the book. But I had a Collier's encyclopedia when I was a kid. It was one of the best things my father had ever done for me. And I lived in that encyclopedia. Whenever I would hear anything, I would run to look up what was going on with it in the encyclopedia. And of course, when I was taken out of the home, I lost the encyclopedia. It's not like you can pack that up and take it to a foster home, So that was a big loss. And many, many, many years ago, probably when I was in my 40s or 50s, I spoke with my uncle, Jack. I changed his name for purposes of privacy. And he said, I have something for you. And I went to visit him, and he had packed up the Collier's encyclopedia.
Oh, man.
And gave it back to me. And I saw him in Cleveland, and I actually shipped them out to my home in LA. So that was a very, very moving moment for me as an adult.
Yeah, he really loved you. And he sensed the danger there.
Yeah, we were both about to go into great danger.
Yeah, now Maddie is eventually placed in foster homes, and this is during the period of Vietnam. Her life is, just like you say, very much like a soldier, surrounded by unexpected danger. There are homophobic kids at school. Again, it's the courage combined with your imagination that gets you through. Now, here's another quote from the book. "I try to convince myself everything will be fine. Sometimes this works, especially when I think of Harry Houdini, the great escape artist, and Joan of Arc. Puffing out my chest, I imagine broken chains dangling from my wrists." Here again, this is the brilliant writing. I'm you're probably like, all right, enough. "I'm clad in armor," or maybe not. "I'm clad in armor, the flexible kind you can run in, and am invincible. I love how some animals carry built-in ammunition to keep danger away, like skunks. You learn to work with what you've got. My heart," now this is my favorite part, "my heart is a fist of bees, a muscle like no other. Will it learn to defend and attack to keep me safe?" Wow. I love it. The idea of imagination as a survival skill fascinates me because I think about difficult times in my life, and you find a safe place in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so where do you think you'd be today without your ability to create a safe place in your mind? Like, where would you be today without it? I mean, you got that from your mom, right? You said
Yeah,
she's.
I did. I got it from her, and I got it from the poets, Shelley and Keats and Poe, and all the poets that I loved when I was a kid. And yeah, it's interesting when I would talk about the heart being a fist of bees. That has everything to do with shame. Because when you're a kid and you're abandoned by your family, you feel thrown away, you feel disposable, and you have a lot of shame about that as a kid. And that's why the heat of the bees buzzing in the heart just struck me as such a strong metaphor. But yeah, imagination is, it's everything. It's the creation. Nothing that we see in our world would ever have existed without having been imagined first.
Yeah, because you think of all of these stories of people in history who've suffered through these difficult times, and then they'll always say, I found my happy place in my mind. I went there, and that's how I got through it.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, you spent time in a reformatory convent. How did that experience form or change your way of thinking about religion?
It was my safe place. It was harbor for me. And people think of, nuns and convents and Catholic schools as being very abusive. That was not my initial experience there. I felt very safe, and the order of it all and the discipline of it felt good. I think kids need order and discipline. Otherwise, you just feel like you don't have any boundaries. And in terms of religion, I had more of a mystical sense of religion. I didn't understand how God could be so cruel to people. So that was always a question. And then came to think of, Lucifer and God as two sides of the same coin. And we're always juggling both, so to speak. But it wasn't until much later in my stay at the convent that I realized that nuns could be very cruel, and that the church could be incredibly abusive and hypocritical in terms of their ideas of Christ's love.
But I don't get the feeling that you've ever lost faith in whatever that faith would be in.
I think that faith is the good in other people. Always looking for the good in other people and being able to find it was my strength. And I believe God is two things. It's the good in other people, and it's music.
Adele Bertei is here to talk about her brand new book called Twist, An American Girl. Now, when was it released, Adele?
It was released on March 14th.
I want to ask you about a fascinating statement you make in the book. You say society is not colorblind, evil is. Can you expand on that? That's at the beginning of the book.
As a white girl growing up in a racist enclave of Cleveland, which was a very segregated city, I was an anomaly because I was exposed to Black culture at a very young age. I was in a school called Blossom Hill, another reformatory, which was predominantly Black girls. And I realized that we all had the same experiences with our families. I talk about it in the book as the devil having run through all our families. And I've had dark and light experiences with people of all races and of all genders. And, you can't point to one and say one is worse than the other. And yes, it is true that the Black people in America have been incredibly oppressed. But when it comes down to it, we all have evil and good in us, really. And which side we tend to nurture is the side that's going to thrive.
Yeah, that's the free will part of us.
Yes, that's the free will.
Yeah. Some will say everything is laid out, everything's planned out for you, but you're driving, you're steering the ship. Yeah. Yeah. So It's a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned Edgar Allan Poe, Dickens, Percy Shelley. What drew you to their work?
I mean, it's the playfulness of the language, and it's just so beautiful, the way they would create metaphors and tell stories in poems. The poems weren't just like little abstract pieces. They were real stories, like Annabel Lee and The Raven and The Mask of Anarchy by Shelley. I mean, these were brilliant poems and also very political for their time. many of them. So it's something that I still appreciate. I still go back to the older poets. I mean, I love poetry in general, but there's something about the romantic poets that I still really revere more than any other, I think.
It's always amazing when you look at the biographies of them too. They never financially they struggled.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not until after they pass away. Oh, they were brilliant. What is it about that psychology too? I mean, it's like with the musicians, Jim Morrison and all these. Why do we have to wait until they pass away?
I know.
I don't understand that. It's strange, right?
Yeah, that happened to Peter Lochner, my friend who was in Perubu in Cleveland and created that band. He was one of the most brilliant musicians I have ever heard. I mean, Tom Verlaine of Television, the band Television,
Yes.
absolutely loved his playing. And Tom, to me, was one of the best, very best guitar players on the planet as well. Peter was very self-destructive, and the envy of other people can make us really turn that self-loathing toward toward ourselves. And envy is a terrible, terrible thing. I've seen it so much in my life where people don't want you to shine or show your light.
Well, in the music business, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That really affected Peter. He everybody envied him, and he drank over it. He tried to suppress the hurt, really.
We'll talk about the character of Nina and how she comes into Maddie's life. And is this your first serious relationship?
It is, yeah. Nina was a girl I met in Blossom Hill who was incredibly intelligent and quite beautiful. And she kind of called me on my BS, so to speak, because, we created a society inside of Blossom Hill. You can't rob teenagers of their sexuality and their dating and this is the time when you're first falling in love and you're dating and you're experiencing all these things. We were still going to do that one way or the other, being locked up. So we would kind of mimic the worst toxic masculine traits of guys that we could think of, like gangsters and pimps. And it was just really ridiculous. Fun, but absurd to today's practices, But Nina called me on it. She's like, "What, is that really what you aspire to do when you get out of here? You want to be a pimp?" So, it was just so out of the mainstream, this story, which is also one of the reasons why I wanted to tell the story, because it's kind of unbelievable, but it really happened,
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, when you read it, if you didn't know that this is about your life, you would think, yeah, this is a work of fiction here, but it's not. Yeah, it's it's an amazing story, and there's more to come. I think we're going to get to that. I'm going to ask you maybe if there's a sequel coming, but yeah, there's a moment in the book when it hits Maddie. She wants to be a singer in a rock and roll band. She's about to turn 18. Can you talk about that moment in the book and your story too? The moment you knew you wanted to be in a rock band.
I was living beneath a troupe of performing drag queens when I first got out of the reformatory, and we used to hang out at this gay bar called The Change. And one night they had a rock and roll band perform called Cinderella Backstreet, and Peter Lochner was the lead singer and guitar player in that band. And I saw them on stage, and it was when glitter was just breaking out with David Bowie and Mott the Hoople and LaBelle. The trio LaBelle, and it was a very exciting time in music where people were playing with being queer and androgyny and all of that. And I saw this band and I thought, oh my God, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. And consequently, that's when the book ends. But consequently, when I got into life in Cleveland Heights, where I was living, I ended up being discovered by the same guy, Peter Lochner, singing in a local bar band. And he started a band with me, and that is the sequel book to Twist. It's called Peter and the Wolves. Peter and the Wolves book is actually already out. It's for sale.
It is. Okay.
It was published before Twist, even though it's out of sequence,
Ah, okay.
But it is where Twist leaves off, Peter and the Wolves starts. And then at the end of Peter and the Wolves will be the next book, which is called No New York, and it's about going to New York and getting involved with the Contortions and Brian Eno and the whole no wave scene in New York City in the late.
Yeah. So you're working on that one right now?
Working on that one now. Yeah.
You left Cleveland for New York City, what, 1977?
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. How was that transition?
Incredible. And because I had already been a member of a strange society within Reformatory, when I got to New York City and discovered this new tribe of artists where many women were coming from all over the world, from all over the country, to not just make music, but make art, shoot film, take photographs, write. It was an incredible moment in history that I have not seen documented yet in a book, which is why I'm writing the book now. It was a very vibrant explosion of art in New York at that time.
Just creative freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever comes out of you, whether it's music, painting, whatever it is, just do it. The first rock and roll band of gay women is the Bloods. So that you formed that with Kathy Ray?
Yes, with Kathy Ray and Anderson Toone and Kathleen Campbell and Brenda Alderman. Yes, we were an all-girl band. We were very queer. Everybody thought of us as very dangerous because we weren't hiding who we were.
Right. That's what I was going to ask. What kind of reaction did you get from people within the industry?
Within the industry, no one would touch us with a barge pole, of course, because of, being out. I mean, when you think of it, Ellen DeGeneres didn't even come out until the mid or late 90s, I think. So we were way ahead of our time. And we had a great, great time performing and touring in Europe. And but we couldn't really, we recorded one single with the Au Pairs label in Birmingham in England when we were over there. But we couldn't get anywhere with the band. So eventually we broke up and I went solo after that.
I just interviewed Simon Napier Bell, who managed. Yes. It just went up tonight. What a great guy, a great interview. And he managed Wham.
Mm-hmm.
And, he said, George Michael, the reason why, because he wanted to be famous. He was very driven to be famous. Yeah. But when he became famous, still, he wasn't happy, and it's because he couldn't come out. And it's the saddest thing to hear. I don't understand it. Mm-hmm. How things would have been different for him, if that was the case. But he could not do it. And then the image, he actually went deeper into that image when his solo career came out, because then the record label wanted him to have this macho image. So the women are, in love with him. And it's unfortunate, but I think, and you could speak to it more, but where are we at right now? Things much better these days.
Oh, much better. But it's funny you bring up Simon, because Simon Napier Bell and Vicki Wickham, who was part of Ready, Steady, Go, one of the producers on Ready, Steady, Go. I write about them all in my book, Why LaBelle Matters.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There was a group of gay impresarios in London at that time in the 60s, and they were behind all the great music that was happening, the Rolling Stones, and Napier Bell has been around forever. He's a great personality, And
he's still going strong. He is as busy as ever. Yeah.
But they all have to be in the closet,
Yeah. He had a great story in one of his books when he wanted to tell his parents, and it went on for like 2 years. Yeah, every weekend. This is the moment I'm going to tell him. Yeah. And he didn't. And when he finally does, his dad had a great reaction. Just, he made light of it. He was okay with it, and it was such a relief to him. You worked with Brian Eno. The Bloods opened for The Clash.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. When was that?
That was very exciting. I think it was 1980 or 81. The Clash came over to New York and they did a series of shows at a place called Bonds. And they really wanted to support women musicians. So they had us open for them one night, which was very exciting.
Now, what's it like working with Brian Eno?
He's one of the most creative people I've ever met. Very innovative, very a lovely guy. I had a great time with him. I couldn't work for him long, though, because I was going off to tour Europe, but I had a great experience with him. Yeah. I actually took him around to see the bands that were happening at the time. And he produced a record called No New York with 4 of the bands that one of which I was in, called the Contortions.
And you signed to Geffen Records in 1981.
I did. Yeah.
Thomas Dolby produced your first hit dance single, Build Me a Bridge.
Mhm.
You worked with the Pointer Sisters, Sheena Easton, Matthew Sweet, who I love.
Yes.
In fact, my sisters just had a baby girl called Evangeline, and I always think of
Oh,
Matthew Sweet's Evangeline. Yeah. Tears for Fears, Debbie Harry, Sophie B. Hawkins. Is
mhm.
there a specific moment in your music career that stands out the most to you? Highlight moment.
I think it was with Tears for Fears when I was singing with them on the Sowing the Seeds of Love tour. We were in Marseille, France on my birthday, and he had the audience sing to me. And it was a huge arena. I don't even know how many people were there, but it was, probably upwards of 10,000, which was pretty remarkable, to be on stage.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Yes.
amazing.
You still
Yeah.
write a lot of music these days?
I'm starting to again. Yeah, I came out with a political scorcher called American Elegy a few months ago. It's on all the streaming platforms. And just a couple of weeks ago, I released another song called Savage is the Wolf. So I'm doing it song by song with people I like, as opposed to what I went through in the corporate music business, where they just wanted to control every aspect of what I said, what I did, how I looked. It was really a very different experience than having come out of, such a freeing scene for women in New York than to be controlled by these corporate. Yeah.
Just as a creative being, to have anybody tell you what you should and shouldn't do, it's just maddening. It's maddening. Now, the difference between writing a book and writing a song, inspirationally wise, is it different? Do things come to you? Like, what inspires a song? When does a song come to you?
Songs, they come, like, I'll think up a melody when I'm half asleep and just sing it into my phone. The biggest difference between writing books and writing music, or doing music in general, is the collaborative aspect of doing music is so wonderful. There's nothing like playing music with other people, with other musicians. It's such a high, as is performing with musicians. Writing books is so solitary. It can be quite a lonely enterprise, but playing music is far more joyful. Not that there's, not joyful moments when you're writing, because you come up with some words or some expressions that nail what you really feel, but it's very different music. It's about people.
Who are some of the newer artists or bands that you follow these days?
I think Brandy Carlisle is amazing. I am so happy to see people like Brandy Carlisle and Rufus Wainwright, who are very authentically gay and not ashamed or being pushed into closets. It's very reassuring to see that. I love people like Lil Nas X, who I also think is absolutely amazing. I mean, there's some great people doing music today, exciting things happening.
What message do you hope readers will get from reading this book, Twist?
That magic is possible. You can learn to take dark experiences and transmute them into a way of light, I think. I mean, it's like alchemy. It's like being able to forgive people and understanding that the society we live in systemically crushes your creativity, and they want you to be indoctrinated into a certain lifestyle that doesn't feel good to people, and to fight against that. I've been to Trinidad, and everybody's an artist in Trinidad. If we could seize that our creativity that we're born with here in America, maybe people wouldn't go straight to wanting to own guns.
Yes, I just had a guest put out a book on Dark Side of the Moon, and we were talking about that line, the Thoreau line, living in quiet desperation.
Yes.
And Roger Waters uses that, and that's exactly what he said. When schools were closing down the
arts programs.
Oh my God.
I know.
Yeah.
That happened quite a while ago too.
Yeah, what a mistake.
Yeah, because they're giving guns to children now. Children can have guns, but they can't have paintbrushes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's just nuts.
Yeah.
We're in a very nutty moment right now.
Yeah. So Adele, where can people reach you on social media, website?
Yeah, just my name. I'm kind of everywhere. I don't do Twitter because I think it's kind of a cesspool, but I am on Instagram and I'm on Facebook. I have a website, www.adelebertei.com. And my music is on Spotify and Apple and Amazon, all the streaming places you can listen to me, and YouTube. And yeah, I'm everywhere. I'm like your greatest secret.
I like great secrets. Absolutely. Thank you very much. And when that next book comes out, you got an open invite here.
If I can, I would be honored. Thank you.
That's it. It's in the books.